Hi, today I'm going to talk about airlock activity. What happens when there is airlock activity and what happens when there is no airlock activity. Now, when I first started brewing, like most brewers, I thought that whenever the airlock was bubbling, that's when fermentation was going on. But really, that may or may not be the case. Truthfully, the only way that you're going to know whether fermentation is going on or not is you're going to have to take a specific gravity reading, and if that gravity reading is dropping, then you have fermentation going on regardless of whether the airlock is bubbling or not. If there is no drop in that specific gravity reading, then you more than likely don't have any fermentation going on. So all that aside, I'm just going to explain what happens when the airlock is bubbling and really what is the purpose of the airlock. And the easiest way for me to explain it, or I guess the best way I can think of it, is I like to think of the airlock as serving the same function as a weight does in a high pressure cooker. The high pressure cooker, you seal it, and when you heat up, the water inside builds up pressure, and what the weight does is it allows some of that pressure to be released. That way this thing just doesn't explode. Similarly, when you pitch your yeast and you're fermenting your beer, your yeast is going to be producing carbon dioxide, and that gas is going to start to expand, and it's going to build a lot of pressure within your fermenter. And your airlock is going to allow some of that pressure to be released so that this thing just doesn't explode and end up all over the place. And if you search online for exploding fermenters, a lot of times what happens is the airlock gets clogged, and that keeps the pressure inside, and that's why a lot of fermenters usually explode. So this fermenter right now, I have in here a stout which has been fermenting for a little bit over 3 weeks. So fermentation is complete. It was complete well over 2 weeks ago. However, there's still a lot of carbon dioxide inside. So if you can picture the inside of this, the beer runs to about whatever the 5-gallon marker is in here, and the rest of the headspace, there's just carbon dioxide. So if I put pressure in here, what happens is some of that CO2 will begin to be released because I'm putting counter pressure into it. And that really also goes to show you that airlock activity, like just happened right now, doesn't necessarily mean that fermentation is going on. All that the airlock activity is telling you is that CO2 is being released, and that's it. So with that being said, a lot of times when you don't have airlock activity, what happens is the most common reason that I know why no airlock activity is going on is that a lot of times the brewer did not provide enough oxygen to their beer or wort. And really the most common is that they didn't make a yeast starter. And what a yeast starter does for you is that you're adding highly active yeast, so fermentation begins a little bit faster and your airlock begins to bubble a little bit faster. If you don't make a yeast starter, then it may take a while before the yeast become very active and a lot of that bubbling begins to happen. Now, another reason that I hear sometimes why your airlock is not bubbling is because you may have a leak somewhere in here. Honestly, I don't really know many brewers who experience that, although it may be a possibility that you may have a leak and the pressure is escaping from somewhere else besides the airlock, and that is about it. Now, the last thing that I want to point out is, just like the pressure cooker, when temperature rises, the gas is going to expand, and that may increase your airlock activity. On the other hand, if you drop the temperature, the air inside contracts, and that may create a vacuum, and you can get some of this liquid to get sucked into your fermenter. And the only reason why I know this is because there were a few times when I kept wondering why I would fill up my airlock to the fill line, and then the next day I will find this almost half of it gone. And what was happening was that I was pitching yeast a few degrees above where I was going to ferment, and I was just placing the airlock at that temperature, and then as the temperature dropped, it sucked in some of that liquid before any CO2 was able to put counter pressure and push it out. So that's just a thought. If that's happening to you, that's more than likely the reason why why that is happening. So that's all I wanted to talk about. What happens when an airlock is having activity and when there is no activity, and how an airlock really doesn't tell you that fermentation is going on, but really all it tells you is that carbon dioxide is escaping your fermenter.